Okay, everyone, welcome to the sixth lecture for human motor control and learning. Today's lecture, we're going to be talking about attention and memory, so two separate topics. First half, we'll be talking about attention, and then the last half, we'll be talking about memory. And this is the last lecture that will be covered on the midterm. So the midterm will cover lectures 1 through 6, and I have posted a breakdown of the midterm, what it entails, and check that out in the midterm module. And we were discussing in lecture today about pushing the lecture back. So we're just taking a poll with everyone returning back to the classes that were on strike. It seems as though you have 3 midterms in a row. I'm not opposed to moving the midterm back a week. I'm just going to check the poll at the end of the lecture, and then we will have that sort of determined. Natalie's asking if the midterm is pushed back, would the quizzes also be pushed back? Sure. Probably in your best interest to just complete them. Just because I would use the quizzes as a way to focus your studying. The questions will be very similar to the questions posted in the midterm review and cover the topics that were listed in the questions in the quizzes. Questions in the quizzes are taken from the textbook as well, so they're just covering the topics from different angles, which we're going to learn is the best way to sort of retain information that you're learning. So before we get started, is there any questions about any of the labs, anything else, and any concerns about the course, and anything? Yes, the midterm, it will be same thing, lockdown browser and respondus monitor. And it will be either next week or the week after during lecture time. So it'll be Wednesday, 3:30. So Jessica, just to check on the breakdown's been posted. So just check in the module under midterm, the midterm module, sorry, and then check under the breakdown. So today's lecture, we're going to be discussing, like I said, attention and memory. For attention, we're going to be discussing different attention theories, discussing the concept of attention demands and how we're able to focus attention visually and internally, and that gives us sort of a baseline for our ability to multitask or do multiple things at once, and consider attention as a limiting factor in multitasking. And then we're going to talk about memory, discussing the memory structure and how it pertains to motor skills, and then how we can maximize learning or memory, sorry, through understanding the process of how it works. So let's first start off with attention. So the preparation for the performing a motor skill, or the preparation and performance of the preparation for and performance of a motor skill is influenced by our limited capacity to attend to specific things. Oh, you can't see it, eh? Well, that's fun. So I'm just gonna just go through the chat, the whole lecture. How about now? It may have just canceled the poll. I'm not sure. Okay. I'm frozen, aren't I? Ugh. Well, this sucks. Let me see here. How can I? Still frozen? Okay. Hold up. I'm gonna have to log out and then log back in. Still working? Okay, we'll go to the slides now. Okay. I'm frozen again. Yep. Can you see if Am I still frozen, everyone? I like refroze. Do you want me to log back out, try it again, and so you can see me? We'll do it where you can't see me. Log back out. Ugh. That is annoying. Wait, let's see if I stop sharing. Legit annoying. Okay, here I'll log back out, log back in. Okay, not frozen, not frozen. Let's see here. Please don't freeze. We're good? Holy. Okay, well, I apologize. I'm not really sure what happened, but let's get started. So, way back in 2022, I was talking about a lecture that I was going to do about attention and memory, and I'm going to continue that now. When we're talking about attention, we're talking about how the performing and preparation of us doing motor skills is influenced by our limited capacity to attend to and select different attention to focus on. Does that make sense, everyone? Now, when we are talking about attention in relation to motor skill, we are talking about it in two different ways. So we're talking about attention referring to consciousness and awareness, what we are attending to. So when I am paying attention during a motor skill, you could use that term to say, what am I focusing in on externally or internally? Where is my focus going when I am performing a motor skill? So that is one sort of concept of understanding of attention. And the second thing is attention is a way to describe the cognitive effort required to do a particular motor skill. So playing the piano requires a lot of attention, whereas picking up a cup doesn't require a lot of attention. So do we both understand, do we all understand both those two different definitions? They're both talking about attention in relation to motor skills. That makes sense, everyone? Okay, perfect. Because research or motor control research is specifically interested in assessing attention, how it relates to performing motor skills, but also multitasking. And so we're going to talk about how attention in relation to motor skills has been assessed in research by looking at multitasking, and then also looking at what we specifically are focusing in on when we perform different motor skills. Because we keep saying that as you get better and better at a motor skill, things become automatic. You know, when you're playing sports and you become really good at it, the sport tends to slow down. You almost have to focus your attention on less for less amounts of time. So as you get better at something, it requires less attention to perform. So maybe we can figure out, as people get better, maybe they're attending to different things for a particular motor skill. The first thing we'll talk about is this whole idea with multitasking. And it was known for many, many years, even before all this motor control research, that clearly there was sort of a limitation when trying to perform multiple things at once. This study from 1890, Jacques Loeb, showed that when having someone, I think they were doing math or putting in mental effort, their grip strength decreased. So multitasking led to a sort of performance detriment. So when we're multitasking, when doing multiple things at once, there's three different options that can occur. We may experience no difficulty when doing the multiple tasks at once. We may be able to complete one task, but our performance in the other tasks that we're doing may be poor, or we may not be able to complete any of the tasks. And so what research has looked at is this idea of attention as our limited, as our sort of our capacity limit in being able to multitask. Let me play this video. Am I frozen? No, good.
It was hard for Shirley Jefferson to distinguish whether she forgot something or never really absorbed it in the first place.
And then I found out that all these things, what I was having with multitasking and so forth, I wasn't. I wasn't paying attention.
We all do it, but research shows multitasking drains the brain. Several studies looked at MRIs of the brain in action and found there's finite space for tasks that require attention.
It turns out when they look at functional MRI evaluations of multitasking, the overall brain activity actually decreases when you multitask. So you're not storing anything and you're doing either item well.
Everything seems to go okay when you add a second task to what you're doing. The brain can divide and conquer, but research suggests once you add a third, things start to go downhill and more mistakes are made.
My theory would be that some of the information, as you're shifting from one idea or area to another, and because of that shift, you're wasting energy.
Dr. Michael Robb is a geriatrician who specializes in memory problems. He finds older people are extremely concerned with maintaining their memory. They could take a cue from Shirley, who brushed up on her skills.
Most important thing to me was it told me to pay more attention. That's what we tend to get lazy memory habits and say, oh, well, that's part of getting old.
Turns out age may not be the biggest culprit. Seniors might be asking too much of themselves, taking on too many things at once.
What happens is the overall measurement of brain activity goes down when you start to multitask.
For Lee Memorial Health System, I'm Amy Osher.
So does that video help understand sort of this idea of attention as a limiting factor in our ability to multitask? There's only so much brain power that we have, and by trying to do multiple things at once, you're sort of over extending that amount of attention. And this was something that was easily seen in all different types of studies. And so from those studies came out theories of, well, how is attention as sort of like a limiting capacity of our brain? What's sort of the mechanism behind how that works in the brain? And so the first set of theories were called filter theories or bottleneck theories. And so what they suggested was that we are able to take in a lot of information, but we process things serially. So there's a bottleneck where we're able to take in all the information from our sensory processes, and we can only process one thing at a time. So therefore, it's creating a bottleneck. So the limitation in our sort of ability to multitask from our attention is that we are able to attend to everything, and then to process what we're attending to, we can only do things serially, meaning like in serial order, one thing at a time. Does that make sense, everyone? So the problem with bottleneck theories is that they don't really sort of match what happens in real life. Have any of you ever heard of the cocktail party phenomenon? So the cocktail party phenomenon is just a sort of basis to show that we are able to sort of be aware of things that we're not actively processing. So if I'm at a cocktail party, that's what it used to be called. So if you're at a party and you are talking to someone, you're blocking out what's going on in the background, right? So you're concentrating on the conversation that you're having at this party, at this cocktail party. Now, if we were to be able to process things only serially, that means if someone was talking behind your back and you heard your name, you wouldn't be able to hear that. But what actually happens is that if you're attending to someone and then you hear your name in the background, we automatically perk up and switch our attention to where we heard that. Would that make sense? Or is that something that we can all agree on? So that means that we are able to process things more than one at a time. Or else because we're attending to someone and having a conversation, if we're only processing one thing at a time, then we would only be focusing on the person we're speaking with. And if our name was said behind our back, we wouldn't be able to hear it and process that was our name. So newer attention theories had to incorporate this idea of the cocktail party phenomenon, suggesting that we're able to process multiple things at once, but we selectively choose what we're attending to. Does that make sense? And so the next round of theories, it showed that we didn't process things serially. We proposed this idea of what are called central resource capacity theories, meaning there's a central capacity of attention, and doing multiple things at once means it takes a certain amount of attention from this main pool of attention, which is more like what we actually see. And this would explain the cocktail party phenomena, in that we are using most of our attention to focus on the conversation, but there's some of our attention that's being allocated to listening to what's happening behind us. Central resource capacity theories then would say that our limitations in multitasking are when the multiple things that we want to do at once are more than the amount of attention capacity that we have. So it's exceeded our resource capacity limits. Does that make sense? Here's a visual. So here is our attention capacity. And this is the attention required by two different tasks. Talking and driving in a car would take up this amount of attention, and then talking with the passenger, this would take up this amount of attention. So based on this diagram, would there be a limitation in our performance in either of those tasks, considering this is our attention capacity? Yeah, of course, there would be no limitations because we have enough attention capacity to do both at the same time. The most popular of the central resource capacity theories was Kahneman's attention theory. And the reason why it became so popular was because he was the one that suggested that this central resource capacity, or the amount of attention that we have, is flexible. So based on our arousal level, if we're stressed, if we're sleepy, if we are energized, the amount of attention that we can have to give is more or less. Because we see that when people are stressed, they have a harder time multitasking versus when they are focused and, mentally strong, for example. So in this theory, it's a central resource capacity theory, meaning that there's a central amount of attention that we're able to allocate to potential different activities for multitasking. And that capacity of attention is going to increase or decrease depending on our arousal level. This would be a graph demonstrating that flexible capacity ability. And think of this is our performance over our arousal level. As we are either not very aroused, so sleepy, or too aroused, meaning very stressed, both of those are going to lead to decreases in our attention ability. The most attention capacity that we have is when we're at a moderate state of arousal, which is something I think we can all agree on, maybe? Does that make sense, everyone? Perfect. Kahneman's attention theory also suggested there was 3 general rules of how people allocate the available attention that we have. That attention is flexible depending on our stress levels, but typically we allocate our attention available to these 3 general rules. We typically ensure the completion of at least one task. So if you're multitasking, you generally are focusing on completing at least one, and then additionally adding more on top of that. We generally allocate our attention to what he called enduring dispositions, which just means that we tend to allocate our information, or our attention, to things that naturally attract our attention. Loud noises, our name, things that are meaningful for us or the event tend to draw our attention. So for example, the cocktail party phenomenon, hearing your name, because that's sort of important to us, it's an enduring disposition, it's going to draw our attention. Whereas if you heard someone else's name that you didn't know, that you would still continue on. You wouldn't even perk up. You would just continue on having a conversation. Does that make sense, everyone? The last thing, in terms of what we generally allocate our attention and our mind to when multitasking, are momentary intentions. And this is our ability to self-direct the allocation of our attention. So if I am learning how to swing a golf club, and my coach that is teaching me says, make sure you, when you're swinging, you look at the ball. You look at the ball, don't move your head, you look at the ball, and only when you make contact do you look up. So I'm telling that myself in my head. As I'm doing that motor skill, I can allocate my attention to this momentary sort of intention that I was told. So I can force my attention to focus on one thing, for example. Does that make sense, everyone? The central resource capacity theories, or the main one that we're talking about, that makes sense. It makes the most sense. In newer research, they're thinking about evaluating attention as a multiple resource theory, meaning that there's different types of processing, and that will have an amount of attention for each type of information processing. So sensory input, response input, stage of processing, type of memory. It's probably more like this, but then research is going to look at, well, how many different types of attention are there? So that's the current state. Everyone good so far? Awesome. So then we're going to look at, well, how did research sort of assess attention demands with multitasking? And so the main way that researchers evaluated attention demands when multitasking was through what's called the dual task procedure. So it's a procedure involving two tasks that was used in research. And simply what you did was you had a participant performing one task of the primary task, evaluate how they do, and then you would have them do that primary task simultaneously with a secondary task. And then you could evaluate whether or not the performance of the primary task was affected. If it wasn't, then you could multitask effectively, meaning that your attention capacity was enough to do both of those. And then you could test different secondary tasks and look at when there was performance detriment. Well, those take a lot of attention. Does that make sense, everyone? Let me give you a little background of, this was 2008. So this is when like Bluetooth in the car, like with talking on your phone, was just coming out way back in the day. I don't even know if you guys were born yet. Okay. But this is an example of using a dual task procedure. And so what this study did was they had people in a car simulator, so pretended driving. And then what they did was they evaluated their performance of reaction time and probability errors. And they evaluated it while having a secondary conversation with a handheld versus hands-free phone. What they found in this study was that there was no significant difference between having a conversation hands-free versus while talking on the phone while driving, meaning they both caused limitations in driving. And that's why originally in some states, Bluetooth, like talking on the phone was illegal, same as talking on Bluetooth, because of this study. Does anyone have any ideas as to why talking on the phone with handheld device versus a hands-free device would both cause limitations in driving ability versus having someone talk, like someone in the car? You're still meant to have focus on the voice. I think there was a typo there, Jessica. But the reason why, I'll just tell you, is that they thought that maybe by having someone in the car, you're sharing the experience together. So if me and Jessica are sitting in a car, I'm driving, right? And, a car accident happens or a swerve happens or a big noise, we're both going to stop our conversation and we're both going to have shared awareness of our environment. Whereas if you're talking on the phone, that person you're talking to isn't going to respond to what's happening in your environment. And they think that that's probably the reasoning behind it. Nowadays, it's hands-free is legal and allowed, but that was sort of an example of a dual task procedure. So the next thing we're going to be talking about as it sort of pertains to attention is our ability to focus attention. That term is called attentional focus. And it's the way that we're able to take our attention and focus it on specific aspects. We can have a wide field of focus or a wide range of focus. So you can have a narrow attention focus or a wide attention focus. And our attention can be focused externally to our environment and also internally into our own thoughts or our own body. And that relates to attention, meaning our awareness or being able to process all of the sensory information coming in. So there's going to be internal information and as well as there's going to be external information. And we can focus our attention to try and collect as much as we can. We can have a wide width of focus, or we can have a narrow width of focus. We're going to be really strongly attending to only one thing. We can focus externally. I'm going to look at this cup and focus strictly on this cup or this lecture. Or I could be focusing internally. Maybe something's going on in my life and I am stressed out. And so I have, an internal focus. I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing tonight to deal with this issue, whatever it be. And so that ability to switch our focus, our attentional focus, is called attention switching. So maybe our ability to multitask or our ability to improve at multitasking is improving our ability to figure out how to switch our focus from certain things. Like, for example, think about a quarterback, right? When a quarterback receives the ball, he has to, or they have to, look at the defender, think about the play, which way they're going to go, maybe focus internally on how tired they are, or if someone's pulling on their back. They have to be able to focus on multiple things at once to select a decision, right? And then inappropriate attentional switching can lead to performance detriment, right? So if he looks at the defender and then he stops focusing, or he looks at, for the passer, and then the quarterback forgets or doesn't attend to what's happening behind him, someone's going to tackle him, for example. So his switching of attention to focusing on something external made him lose performance because he lost attention from something else that was happening. Or I put up an example of maybe when you were playing piano. So if you're playing piano and then you have to, change the page, or moving your eyes to another area, then you forget what keys are coming. Does that make sense, everyone? Remember, the point of the attention lecture is understanding that we have sort of a capacity of amount of attention, and that attention is what's going to dictate how we're able to multitask. That attention is a certain amount. It's flexible based on our stress levels or sleep levels. And we can focus that attention into externally or internal. Do you think that focusing externally or internally makes a difference? We've talked about this before when it comes to this whole concept of choking. And as it pertains to motor skills, as sort of the point of this course, having an internal focus of attention leads to poor performance in skills that you've already learned. It is better to focus your attention on the goal than to think too internally, because then you are sort of interfering with the normal coordination that you've developed through repetition. Does everyone understand or heard the term choking in sports? So with choking in sports, it's called, scientifically, the de-automation of skills hypothesis. And so what they suggest is that an internal focus is appropriate when we're learning a motor skill. So I'm learning how to throw a baseball, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so I gotta move my hips, make sure I get really arch my arm. I'm thinking of ways to really pull my skills, sort of my body together to achieve this skill that I'm practicing. And as I get better and better, it all becomes sort of automatic, because through repetition, I'm learning better coordination, right? As you get better at something, you are focusing less internally and focusing more externally on the goal. It becomes more automatic. For people that choke, what they think is happening is that they're overthinking. They're switching their external focus back to internal focus. They're overthinking what their body is doing. They've already developed through repetition and practice the ideal coordination pattern. And because they're focusing internally, they're screwing up that automatic coordination that was the motor program stored in the cerebellum. Does that make sense, everyone? Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Because this would also suggest this idea that as things become automatic, they require less and less attention. So if you were going to multitask with two things that you're an expert at, probably super easy than to try and do two things that you don't do very well. As you get better at something, it requires less and less attention because it's become automatic. Does that make sense? Perfect. And so current research is looking at, looking at those MEG machines and trying to figure out, maybe different parts of the brain are active when things become automatic and when things aren't. When things are not automatic, so there's no automaticity, it looks like the brain activity is more in the frontal lobe. So there's going to be more overthinking, more cognitive sort of processing, maybe more motor planning. Whereas when there is an automatic skill, a skill that you're well learned, then it seems to only activate the supplementary motor area. So maybe it's probably activating everything, but it's probably automatic, so it's a much less activity of the cerebral cortex. So Avery's asking a question: how would internal focus come into play when you're already good at a motor skill, but you're trying to perfect form? Ooh, okay, so you're saying like in practice, you're trying to like change, like when golfers decide they're going to change their swing or something. So that is repracticing. They're trying to adjust a motor skill. So what they would do is they would do the skill and develop internal focus so they can change the automaticity of that motor program. So they're, in that case, you want to add internal focus to try and change the coordination that you've developed. Does that make sense? Whereas with choking, they're doing the skill that they've practiced, but they're inappropriately attending to internal focus because they're stressed, but that's leading to problems. They're overthinking how to move and it's not automatic. Is that good, Avery? Perfect. The next thing in terms of like focusing our attention has been this whole idea of visual selective attention. And so we learned about those eye tracking machines, I think 2 lectures ago. And what some areas of research wanted to look at was, well, visually, what are people attending to when they're performing motor skills? So when evaluating visual selective attention, they're using, like the researchers are using those goggles to look at clearly when we're performing motor skills, part of our attention is focusing in the environment, what's the most important, and putting that into the motor program, right? So what's the difference between when someone's really good at something or when they're not? Is there a change in what they're visually attending to? Is there a change in the attention and how it's being allocated visually, right? So I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but when we're sort of focused on a particular event or situation in front of us, it's often hard to pick out certain things, other things in the environment. Have you ever, you may have already seen this before. Here's an example of visual selective attention. So we can visualize a lot, but we're only picking out certain things from the environment that's most important for us in that situation. When we're focusing our vision on specific aspects, we can miss out other things that are happening in the periphery.
Count how many times the players wearing white passed the basketball.
All right, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16?
How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes.
Oh, whatever.
But did you see the gorilla?
So, for all of you watching this, did any of you miss the gorilla? Did you, Nicole?
This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted.
Yeah, obviously it's been used a lot in different classes and stuff, but this is an idea of sort of like visual selective attention, right? Have an amount of attention, so we're not only focusing visually, like we're also attending to what's going on, but in thinking about how vision is involved, we have a certain amount of attention and we can only visually attend to certain things. When we're focusing our attention on one sort of aspect, we are going to miss out on potentially other things that are happening in the environment, right? And so maybe with getting better at a particular skill, maybe we become better at figuring out what specifically in the environment we need to focus in on, and we can focus in for less amount of time. Meaning that's why it takes less attention when we're good at a particular motor skill. Does that make sense, everyone? Picking out what we do in the environment, so what we're looking at in the environment is called the visual search. It's how we allocate our visual selective attention. And like I said, the way that we sort of evaluate what participants are attending to, what people are looking at when performing different motor skills, is using these eye tracking devices. Now, one thing about these goggles is that they're looking at what the pupil is focusing in on. So it is a very good tool to look at what is the areas in sort of the environment that we're visually focusing our attention on. However, we were talking about peripheral vision. Peripheral vision takes out picks out movement. So by using the eye tracking goggles, we're sort of missing out if people can pick out what's happening sort of in the periphery with movement. But it's a very good tool, and it's been used a lot in research. One thing with the visual sort of output from these recording devices is that it's not possible. So if you are focusing on something and then you move, you shift your attention. So what we're realizing with these, what was realized with these eye recording machines is that when we are focusing on something, if we move our eyes, we've lost attention to that particular aspect. So it's not possible to make an eye movement without also making a shift in attention. This slide is just sort of suggesting that when we are trying to learn a new motor skill, and what we're trying to do is visually, we are trying to pick out the regulatory conditions that are most important for that particular motor skill. So then as you get better and better at a particular motor skill, you're better at picking out the regulatory conditions specific for that motor skill from the environment. And so I have a whole bunch of different examples that was talked about in the textbook about different sports and what they realized sort of changed as you became better and better at a particular skill that they were researching. So for example, there was this study, they were looking at badminton players. And so what they found was that as you got better and better at a particular motor skill, you would visually attend for a less amount of time. So it took a less amount of time to be able to pick out from the environment what was required. This study using soccer players showed a similar result. And what they would do is they would do amateur soccer players and professional soccer players, and they would show them videos. And the professionals would be able to pick out the plays in a much shorter time, right? Oh, this is this play. Versus the amateurs would have to watch the video for longer to figure out the play that was going on. And so what that means, same thing, is that the professionals, because they're better at that motor skill, they're able to visually pick out what's the most important information from the environment quicker. Does that make sense, everyone? Because that's the common theme in sort of visual search and looking at different motor skills. right? When we're looking in the environment, we're going to be picking out regulatory conditions that's going to help us select the action required. It's going to constrain that selected action. So we're taking the parameters and adding it to the motor program. And then it's also going to be helpful in the timing, remember tau. And so as we get better, maybe we're just better at picking out the regulatory conditions that are going to help assist with this. This was the same sort of study looking at tennis players. They found that what expert players would look at was different than beginners. So expert players would sort of look at the body positioning of the person and then the ball at the last moment, whereas beginners would look at the ball the whole time. And so same study with baseball players. What they found was that so a batter is watching a pitcher going to throw the ball at them. The beginners would just keep focusing on the ball, whereas using those goggles and seeing what the people were actually looking at, they found that the experts would look at the body, the elbow and shoulder and head mechanics of the pitcher, and then the ball. Probably because it would give them an idea of the pitch or the timing of the pitch, and then they would focus in on the ball for tau. Here's an example with driving a car. So they found that beginners would have their eyes all over the place. They would look at very like sort of try to look at everything, whereas the experienced drivers that they did in this study, they tended to fixate their eyes on less amount of things for a shorter amount of time. So it's like with experience, they were able to pick out what's the most important thing from the environment and quicker. Does that make sense, everyone? Awesome. Now, this study was done at the University of Calgary by Joan Vickers, and it's really important because she was focusing visual attention and all the things that we're talking about previously in the previous slides. But what she found was that she was looking at the Canadian women's basketball team, and so she wanted to see what's the difference between the different players when what they're focusing in on. And what she realized was that when she evaluated the different players and whether or not they hit or miss the target, so the free throw, she could tell based on the final fixation time of the pupils. So what she developed was this whole idea of the quiet eye. So when we're performing a motor skill, we tend to fixate our eyes on the most important aspect right before initiation of the movement. And depending on how long that fixation time was, there was a significant difference of when each of the players hit the shot versus missed the shot. Their eyes were fixated for a less amount of time, statistically, when they missed the shot. So she started this whole idea of this quiet eye. It was her sort of study that started this concept, and then a whole bunch of studies proved this quiet eye concept in a wide range of different sports and in different motor skills. The quiet eye refers to the final eye fixation of the person just before movement initiation. So when we're catching a ball, the final eye fixation is tau, is looking directly at the ball to be able to time your catching motion, for example. The 4 common characteristics of the quiet eye phenomenon in all motor skills is that it's directed to a critical location or object as it pertains to that motor skill. It's a stable fixation of the gaze, so it's locking in. Its onset is just before movement, and the duration tends to increase or becomes longer as you become more elite at that motor skill. Let's look at an example of the quiet eye with goalies. Any goalies in the class? You're a goalie, Jessica? Sweet. Your spelling is amazing.
For a goaltender, looking at the puck as a player shoots seems fairly obvious. Research at the University of Calgary has shown that goaltenders directed about 70% of their fixations to the puck as a player is going through the shooting motion. What is not so obvious is that the amount of time a goaltender spends focusing on the puck can be the difference between making a save and getting scored on. Studies show that when goaltenders successfully made a save, their final fixation on the puck started sooner and was about 125 milliseconds, or an eighth of a second, longer than when they got scored on. It may not seem like a long time, but when the puck's flight is only around 200 milliseconds, this last good look at the puck, or quiet eye period, seems to be a crucial indicator of success. A quiet eye period that starts early and has a long duration allows the goaltender to mentally predict where the puck will be going and plan the actions necessary to make it stop. It might also allow them to physically ready themselves for the explosive movements necessary to stop a 3-inch disc of vulcanized rubber that can travel at speeds around 90 miles per hour.
I have a whole bunch of different examples. Look at this one with policing. Super interesting. No, you said superiors.
The Calgary Police Service training facility, where officers hone their
No, it's because you were
skills
so
to make
excited by the lecture, you were just
life and
focusing your
death
attention on the
decisions.
You'll
screen,
see when
not
it
the
blinks
typing.
in and out, that means he's actually blinking at that time.
Just like the situation.
So wait, so do you see the red dot? So the like those eye tracking devices, that's what the police officer in this case, or it tells you what the person is looking at.
In this police training exercise, an officer arrives to find a man standing at a table. The man quickly spins around and the officer is faced with a split-second decision: shoot or hold your fire. Is that a gun he's holding or just a cell phone? On the range, officers learn how to fire their weapons. In the classroom, Joan Vickers usually works with elite athletes.
The question is, can anyone maintain their focus and their concentration under the extreme pressure of a firearms encounter?
Using an eye tracker device that follows the movements of the eye, Vickers found that elite athletes and police officers fix their sights on a target and don't refocus on their weapon. Vickers discovered what is called the quiet eye.
It's the last thing that you see before you have to make a critical movement. So in this police study, it was what your eye was stable on for at least 100 milliseconds before you pull the trigger. That red cursor that you see, the little one, shows his eye move. Those are fixations when they're stable. And he's trying to figure out left hand, right hand, where exactly is this gun that I told, or this weapon, or this problem that I've been told I might have to deal with. When the eye moves across really quick, watch, this is called a sac when it moves across real quick to the other side. He's going over there waiting for it. Now he knows he's got a serious problem. Right, now you've got about a half a second from this point to deal with this problem.
Vickers' study revealed officers with the quiet eye had...
Oops, I screwed that up, but interesting, right? Everyone? And so what training programs have done is you've looked at, okay, well, this is what the experts, so to pick a particular motor skill, right? And so this is going to sort of relate to training and rehab. You look at a expert in a particular motor skill and look at what their eyes are fixating on or what they're sort of visually attending to. You can teach that to beginners or intermediates, to try and speed up the process of learning. But there can't be a generalized visual training program. What you look at is very specific to only that motor skill. So you can't generally say be better at all motor skills by like training a visual program that's good for everything. Does that make sense, everyone? Jessica, does that make sense? Perfect. Me and Jess, here we go. Okay, so that was attention. Did you find that material super difficult or interesting? Most of you always say, oh, this is very interesting. It's a lot, but it's interesting. Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Renato. Cool. Perfect. So now let's finish up with talking about memory. Now, in any of your other courses, has anyone ever talked about memory or like the sort of like the structure of memory, how it works, how to maximize it? Because we're going to be talking about memory as it pertains to motor skills, but I do feel like this, oh, second bit, okay. Okay, that's good. But I do find that the principles and understanding of memory that you're going to learn from this part of the lecture, it relates to memory in general. So learning all different concepts or all different skills, sorry, all different ways of learning. And so that would help you cognitively with like academia. So memory is defined as a living organism's sort of ability to remember previous experiences. So my memory is probably evolved from a smaller evolutionarily, I don't know, unicellular, multicellular animal that was able to, oh yeah, remember, don't eat that, that's bad. And so by having memory, it allows the organism to learn from previous experiences. The functions of this memory in general, but for us, is storing information, right? Remembering things, taking things out or retrieving information that we've stored, as well as sort of central processing. The ability to process our old memories in relation to what is happening now and sort of act as a central executive. And that's the function of memory. And it's comprised of two functional systems. We have our working memory and our long-term memory. So how does it impact motor skill learning? Now, like I said, we have two different memory systems. We have our long-term memory, and this is where we store our information. We have procedural memories, semantic memories, and episodic memories. Those are the three different types of long-term memories that we can store, and we'll talk about what the three of those are. And then we have our central, or our working memory, sorry. And our working memory is going to be sort of our I wouldn't say consciousness, but it is like our consciousness. It's the area that's processing everything that's happening in real time and coordinating everything for us. It's basically our central executive in terms of relating short-term memory, so things that we see and hear and think about, and then relating that to previous memories, right? How it impacts and what's going on in real life. So hopefully I didn't confuse you guys there, but let's talk about that. So have you all heard the term short-term memory? So we used to think that, like the way that researchers used to describe it was that we had our short-term memory and we had our long-term memory. If you smoke a lot of weed, you lose short-term memory, right? I don't know if you guys ever heard that. That's what they used to tell us in school. But what we now call the two different memory systems are working memory and long-term memory. Working memory, because it is sort of addressing the fact that our short-term memory is really a processing what's going on in real time. So it's our central executive, okay? So the working memory is a memory system associated with sort of processing our sensory, perceptual, attentional, and short-term memory. All of that is being processed, and it allows people to respond to the demands of a right now situation. So think of this evolutionarily, how it evolved. We have our working memory. So it's going to have a critical role in dealing with situation right now. So my working memory is going to make a decision or problem solve based on what it's aware of what's happening, plus what's happened in the past. So sort of processing long-term memories and relating that to, okay, what's going on right now in the real time, and then putting all that together. So working memory isn't really just short-term memory. It's sort of a interactive workspace where your brain is sort of processing everything. This is basically our working memory, is like our cognition. Does that make sense? And then the three components of our working memory, and the one thing with this is because they did come from psychology, it's given really weird names. But the three components of our working memory are our phonological loop. So this is our ability to remember words and numbers. Our visual spatial sketch pad is our ability to remember visual information. And then we have our central executive, which is coordinating the phonological loop, the visual spatial sketch pad, right? What we've seen, what we've sort of heard, or words that we've remembered, and processing that with our long-term memory to make a decision on what we should do. So I don't know if you all remember those memory games, but you don't even get the memory games on your apps. There's some where you have to memorize like a list of 10 words, and then it goes away, and then like, how many words did I remember? That's sort of an example of our ability to remember words and numbers. That's called the phonological loop. The visual spatial sketch pad is like those memory games where you're shown a picture, and then where was where was the boot, or it's like a picture of a closet, and you have to sort of remember where the boots or umbrella, or I'm trying to think of all the different games I've seen that I give patients like to practice memory. So these are the three components of our working memory. And the interesting thing with our working memory is that things that we take into our sort of the information that we process into our short-term or working memory, they basically last there for 20 to 30 seconds. And the capacity of our working memory is 7 plus or 2 items. So things that we are remembering our short-term memory has a very finite capacity. We can only remember things for about 20 to 30 seconds before we either have to put it into long-term memory or we forget it. And we can only really remember in our short-term memory, our working memory, 7 plus or minus 2 items. Interesting, right? And so we're going to hear about this term chunking. The way there's a sort of a capacity limit of our working memory. The way to improve that is to organize things into smaller components. So that's why when I do the outlines of the lectures, there's so much material in all of the slides, but I try to break it down into like between 5 and 9 different things, because then in your working memory you're always sort of understanding the breakdown, and then rather than listing 100 things, we have our 7 things, and you're able to sort of take items and sort of make it organized into smaller chunks. That's called chunking. So our ability to have this sort of short-term or working memory, it allows people to be able to remember momentary intention. So remember instructions about giving how to perform a skill. So when Avery was saying about practicing learning a golf swing and then like telling yourself something. So that working memory, well, okay, remember this, and you're going to tell yourself in your head. It's your working memory that's going to be processing that in real time. How to, so let's say, okay, I'm learning a new motor skill, and trial by trial, you're trying to do trial and error to figure out if you're getting closer and closer to the goal. That's working memory that's saying, okay, this trial was a little bit better than last trial, and what I did was I moved my foot a little bit more, right? That's all short-term memory stuff. And then the working memory would also be, okay, I did that motor skill, it didn't work out. Why didn't I do it right? And then you're going to take information from your long-term memory, for example, and then add that to your working memory. So you're just processing. And so this is just a visual of how our central executive of our working memory is sort of interacting with visual short-term memory, words and numbers short-term memory, sensory processes that we're attending to. All of that plus long-term memory is going to be combined in our central executive or consciousness to make a decision. Is everyone okay with that? You don't need to know too much about like memory, obviously, like you don't need to be experts. This is more about motor control, but hopefully this gives you a sort of very interesting sort of perspective on how our brain is processing and the whole idea of consciousness. It's the central executive that's able to process short-term memories, long-term memories, and sensory information. This is consciousness. And so sidebar, like the idea of like how to make something consciously aware, to sort of duplicate someone's consciousness, you would just need to have all of the same inputs. So all of the different memories and experiences that have occurred, what's happening in their working memory and their sensory processes. We can finish up now by talking about long-term memory. And so we talked about how working memory or short-term memory has a capacity of about 20 to 30 seconds, and then you tend to forget it. Long-term memory, interestingly, it is permanent. So all studies sort of point to once you put something in long-term memory, it's never forgotten. And so there's like stories of people that have had like brain injuries or strokes, and they're all of a sudden remembering things that happened years and years ago, things that they hadn't thought about since it had occurred. And so it's just sort of evidence that memories that we have put in our long-term memory are never gone. It's permanent. It's what happens when we forget is that it's a retrieval error. We're unable to find that memory within where it's located or been stored in our brain. The capacity of so there was the capacity limits of our working memory was about 7 plus or minus 2 items. The capacity of our long-term memory, or what we can put into long-term memory, is unlimited. It's just about how we organize it and store that information. And so with understanding that things put into long-term memory are permanent, and that the issue with forgetting stuff is our ability to retrieve those information, or that information that we're trying to learn, it pertains to us in academics in that when you're forgetting something, it's because you have forgotten how to retrieve that information from your long-term memory. And so your practice in terms of studying should be constantly trying to pull that information out, looking at it from different angles and being able to figure out where that information is stored. What's the answer? There's 3 different types of long-term memories. There's procedural memories, and this is most relevant to our motor skills. Now, can we all agree that once you've learned to ride a bike, you never forget? You may be rusty, but once you've, and I said this before in I think the first and second lecture, that once you've learned a motor skill, it seems that it's pretty permanent, no? Procedural memories are called implicit memories because they're difficult to verbalize. If I was to ask Jessica, how do you ride a bike? Or ask Nicole, how do you ride a bike? We're all kind of just like, you do this, right? Like it's hard to verbalize how to do it, but we've all remembered it. Implicit memories are ones that are easy to vocalize. Semantic and episodic memories are explicit memories in that we can talk about them. Semantic memories are our ability to just remember facts and concepts, whereas episodic memories are talking about the experience of a memory. So how many of you remember a particular, like, very meaningful event in your life? A birthday, right? A very happy time. You would remember, like, when you met your partner, you would remember the way they smelled, the music that was playing, the feeling that you had. Episodic memories are when we remember a very meaningful event. We remember all of the sensory processes that were occurring at that time. Nicole said something, sorry. I am glad. 1 second, okay. It's cool when an experience is only mentioned by someone, but it's cool when an experience we have is mentioned by someone who don't have memory of. Yeah, yep. Or think about when, okay, you met someone that were wearing a particular cologne or perfume, and it was like, oh my God, that person, I love that person. And then you don't really think about it until you smell that, let's say someone else is wearing that perfume, and then it's like, it all comes back, like, oh my gosh, and like, that's episodic memories. And then Jessica so that episodic event of me roasting you is going to turn into PTSD. So episodic and semantic memories are also called declarative knowledge or explicit because we can talk about it, we can declare, you can speak. Whereas procedural memories are implicit in that we, like I said, we can't really talk about it. But procedural memories are most important to motor skills because they're involving like motor skill procedure. And so this is just the breakdown of our different long-term memories. We have our 3 different types. We have our procedural memories, which are implicit. We can't talk, we can't really, it's hard to verbalize. Whereas our explicit memories, episodes and facts and knowledge, we can talk about. And so the process of sort of putting information into long-term memory is the process of taking that information, encoding it, being able to store it, and then when being able to take it out from long-term memory, that process is called rehearsal. Rehearsing the retrieval of that information. So if you are studying, what you're doing is you're reading in your working memory, you're remembering 20 to 30 seconds ago, right? 7 plus or minus 2 things. And then you're trying to take that information, consolidate it, encode it, to store it into long-term memory. When you're practicing or learning something, you're constantly putting something into long-term memory and rehearsing how to take it back out. The way to think about, right, everything's connections. Rehearsing means like you are figuring out where that's stored and sort of the things to think about in real time to retrieve that information from your long-term memory. And so with academia, you should always challenge yourself and ask yourself questions about the material that you're learning because it allows you to have a rehearsal of retrieving that information from long-term memory. When you're putting it in long-term memory, it's always best to organize it or chunk the information into smaller groups because when it's inputted in your brain, it's taking up less space, okay? Hopefully that assists you all with sort of studying, but you're going to organize the information put it in long-term memory as you're studying. And then when you are sort of practicing for a testing environment, you're practicing retrieving that information from your long-term memory. Now, how do you assess whether or not you're memorizing or forgetting things? We either have explicit memory tests or implicit memory tests. Explicit memory tests are when we are sort of giving people, thinking of academia, we are testing them on the material that they were supposed to memorize. Recall tests are like short answer fill in the blank, where you are having the person remember the information in entirety, whereas recognition tests are something like matching or multiple choice, where you're given a list and you ask a question, you have a list of answers in multiple choice, and you're recognizing which one is the right answer. So both are testing explicit memories, but recall tests, you have to remember the information in full, whereas recognition tests, you can just recognize of a list which is the right answer. So therefore, our midterm is strictly recognition, whereas the quiz questions involve some recall. You're welcome. Implicit memory tests are for implicit memories or procedural memories. So implicit memory tests are relating to sort of motor skills. Show me physically, procedurally, that you were able to complete that skill, that you memorized it. Everyone okay so far? There's been studies to look at sort of the causes of forgetting. And so it's hard testing like time of like, okay, so it's impractical to like, so think of this, Renata. I'm gonna tell you something right now, and then 20 years I'm gonna ask you again and see if you remembered that. It's hard with time to test long-term memory because technically, remember, it's stored in a permanent state. And so what studies have looked at is what are things that interfere with our ability to put in long-term memory. And so what they did was come up with these proactive or retroactive interference tests. And so what they would do is they would have someone learning something, right? And they would have interference where they would have them so proactive interference is when they are given some information, then given the information to remember. So there's an interference. Retroactive interference is when they're given the information to remember and then presented with some other information. And so what they found was that when, the additional information they gave, either proactively or retroactively, was similar to the information they were supposed to remember, it led to poor ability to put it into long-term memory because it wasn't organized. It's all about organization for your brain. Does that make sense, everyone? Perfect. Oops. Okay. Couple last slides. And so some of the sort of concepts or variables to consider that came from research in terms of maximizing memorization and learning for specifically motor skills as it relates to this course, were that it's realized that humans tend to remember endpoints versus movement characteristics. So any personal trainers here? If I want to train someone how to do bench press, usually, or let's say shoulder press, I say, oh, you're going to go from here, you grab their arms, here to there, right? You show the participant the beginning and end or the end ranges of the movement, and that tends to be able to be understood or processed better than if I was to just take their arms and say, oh, you want to do this as a movement. Does this make sense, everyone? If you emphasize the endpoints of limb movement, it was remembered more than if you're sort of remembering the way that you moved. So if I was going to show someone how to swing the golf club, you're going to go from here to there and back down, right? I'm not going to grab their arms and say, oh, you just do this. People, humans, tend to remember endpoints. The other thing that tends to improve our ability to learn motor skills is if we give someone meaningfulness of the movement. If we can sort of provide metaphoric visual imagery or a verbal label when to the person, something for them to visualize what they're doing, it will improve their ability to remember that motor skill. Like, so for example, we're talking about the golf swing. So you're gonna go from here to here. So that's gonna help them remember versus if I just grab their arms and say, okay, well, just this is the swing, do that now. If I say, okay, well, so this, you're gonna start from here to there. Imagine it like the arms of a clock face. You're gonna start off at 6 o'clock and you're gonna swing, oh gosh, all the way to, what would that be, 2 o'clock, and then back down. I've given them visual imagery of a clock face, something they can sort of relate to add to their understanding of their movement. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, perfect. And then the last thing was that if you tell someone to remember something, they will remember it versus if they're not aware they need to memorize something. So if I give you a list of words and say, I want you to memorize this list of words versus I give you a list of words and say, oh, just read this out, not knowing that you have to memorize it. When you are told you're going to memorize something, you focus better and you try to organize it in your brain. So when you're studying because you're trying to memorize it, right? So when you are studying, don't just read the lectures or watch the synchronous lectures. You want to do it with the intention of trying to learn it or trying to memorize it, which is going to get you to try to organize it or chunk it into different bits so it's going into long-term memory. And that was today's lecture. Any questions, anyone? I'm going to stop sharing. If you struggle for maintaining attention, what can you do? So it's usually that you're trying to attend to multiple things. So you can develop a sort of narrow, you have to sort of learn to narrow your direction of focus. And so it could be like, think about the things that other people have done, right? They study in a dark room, or when they do tests, they have accommodations to do it by themselves. They're trying to limit their sort of other things they can attend to because they're having a hard time focusing their attention on one thing. So it can, like, so deep breathing, mental exercises of focusing for short period, like think like, okay, I can focus for 5 minutes and then stop. It tends to like sort of help. It's like an exercise. Does that make sense, Kel? I've never heard that listening to music while driving has helped, but it could be because when you're listening to music, you're focusing in on one thing plus driving, so 2 things, versus if you have music not playing, you're overthinking and trying to like, your brain is trying to pick out too many other things. What Kayla was saying, instructive one thing, like you need to do multiple things at once, or I get all stir crazy. So that is, so this, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Your visual, you have internally, you're trying to process too many things. You probably have so many things going on that you're always trying to like, you always have all things on your mind. Yeah. So then it's, so that's like cognitive behavioral therapy and trying to figure out, I don't know if you guys know what that is, but trying to like internally do mental exercises and ability to focus. Did I stop recording? Oops. So let's find out you're welcome. Let's find out the poll results. We had 41 to 4. So I will have to do an announcement that the midterm will be in 2 weeks, okay? Also, Maya said something. So turn down music when driving, that not result in choking because you're overthinking naturally. So turning down the music when driving period. Would that not result in choking because you're overthinking a natural movement? No, because with driving, it's not just a motor skill. It's a cognitive skill in that you're sort of being aware of the environment. So you know when someone has anyone ever been in a car when someone's lost and so they have to turn on the music to concentrate? It's because they are trying to attend just visually what's going on, and by having the music playing, it's like they're multitasking, trying to listen to too many things or do too many things at once. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. Okay, perfect. Okay, everyone. So sorry I went over time. It was just all those technical problems. But I will do a posting about the changing in the midterm. I'll have to update the syllabus, and then I will see you guys this week. Okay? Bye, everyone. Stop recording.